Good evening. The Manchester GP, Harold Shipman, is tonight starting 15 life sentences for murder, making him Britain's worst serial killer of modern times. The jury at Preston found him guilty on all 15 charges of killing women patients and on one charge of forging a will. Sentencing him, Mr. Justice Forbes said Shipman had murdered each and every one of his victims by a calculated and cold-blooded perversion of his medical skills. Immediately afterwards, the Crown Prosecution Service revealed that he may have murdered many more of his patients, possibly hundreds.
Harold Shipman was a well-respected family doctor from Hyde, near Manchester, who was initially arrested for the murder of one of his patients, 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy, in September 1998.
I suggest to you that you have injected Mrs. Grundy with a fatal overdose of morphine that brought about her death.
No.
To start off with, we were investigating one death, the death of Kathleen Grundy. Within a couple of weeks, that grew to several deaths, and again, within a very short period of time, it grew to 62 deaths. For over a period of a quarter of a century, Todmorden and Hyde became the killing fields for Dr. Harold Shipman, Britain's most compelling serial killer. Born in England, 1946, Harold Shipman attended Leeds School of Medicine, graduating in 1970, and at the age of 27, began working at Pontefract General Infirmary for 3 years, where it is believed he first killed.
One night we had 3 deaths. We just went from room to room and the patient had died.
On March 1st, 1974, Shipman joined the Abraham Omerton Medical Centre in Todmorden as a highly regarded, caring family GP. 2 months later, on May the 10th, he signed the very first death certificate of his career for 72-year-old Ruth Hickley. According to Shipman, she had died of a kidney failure. Mrs. Hickley was cremated, making it impossible to link the death back to him. Shipman is suspected of killing up to 5 of his patients in 1974.
If you'd like to look at that, just for the benefit of the tape, Dr. Shipman's eyes are closed and he didn't look at the photograph at all. Can you remember Lily Crossley at all? We'll now move on to the next death which we've investigated. Dr. Shipman. This is in relation to the death of a lady called Elizabeth Pierce. That's Elizabeth Pierce. The 3 ladies there, it's the elderly lady dressed in black. For the benefit of the tape, Dr. Shipman's eyes are closed and he did not look at. And the time is 4 minutes past 5. That's the end of the interview.
On January the 25th, 1975, it is believed that he murdered 3 on the same day. Lily Crossley, Elizabeth Pierce, and Robert Lingard all lived within a few streets of each other. During his time in Todmorden, Shipman signed a total of 22 death certificates. He also referred 14 other deaths to the coroner, and in about 40% of these cases, he appeared to have been with the patient on the day he or she died. Statistically, this is startling, as GPs are rarely with their patients at such times. However, the Todmorden killings came to an abrupt halt in the autumn of 1975, when a local chemist expressed concern about the large volume of prescription for pethidine signed by Shipman. Whilst he was working at the practice, Shipman started to suffer from blackouts, which he assured his colleagues were down to epilepsy, a cover for his addiction to pethidine, a synthetic form of morphine, which he managed to obtain by forging his patients' prescriptions in order to feed his habit. The GP's shocked colleagues demanded his immediate resignation. Positive that he would never practice again, they were still compassionate enough to secure him a place as a patient at the Retreat, a psychiatric hospital on the border of York. Shipman was fined $600 by magistrates in Halifax after admitting to 75 drug offences, including forgery and possession. He spent 6 months at the Retreat. Despite all of this, the General Medical Council failed to take any disciplinary action over his conviction. He managed to return to medicine following a 294-day break from practice, working briefly at a family planning centre. A month later, in October 1977, he moved on to the Donnybrook House Group practice in Hyde. Within a week, he is thought to have killed again. His suspected victim was 81-year-old Josephine Carroll. Shipman worked as a partner in the practice for the next 15 years, and by the time he left, he had gained a reputation for no-nonsense expertise, and unlike most GPs, was more than willing to do home visits, which secured him an adoring following, mainly with the elderly patients. What no one knew at the time was that he had probably killed up to 80 patients just at this practice, and when his patients learned that he was setting up a solo practice at 21 Market Street, less than 100 yards away, approximately 3,000 patients followed him. This more than suited Shipman. He was finally away from prying eyes where he was free to do anything without question, and by June 24th, 1998, he claimed his last victim, Kathleen Grundy, a former mayoress of the town, and at this point, he was averaging at least a murder a week. His patients didn't even have to be ill to be of interest to Shipman. Over and over again, he gained the thrills by exploiting those who trusted him the most. He would return time and time again to particular streets, sometimes even the same house, in search for a fresh victim. Shipman killed twice at number 2 Layfold in Hyde. 76-year-old Alice Gorton died there on August 10th, 1979. And 9 years later, on February the 15th, 1988, a later resident of the same house, 83-year-old Jane Jones, was also found dead. He killed 5 people in his surgery without raising the suspicion of his staff. 6 residents from Joel Lane, 5 from St. John's Drive, 6 from Garden Street, and 9 from Ogden Court, which was a warden-controlled home for the elderly. 74-year-old Irene Berry, known to her family as a very fit woman, and not the little old lady people may imagine, was killed by Shipman in 1998. As in so many of his murders, he decided to make a home visit. If he was disturbed, he would feign attempts at resuscitation or pretend to summon an ambulance. And when he arrived to kill Maria, he failed to realise that one of her friends was in the property. The woman was in the bathroom when he arrived. She politely sat in the kitchen while the doctor examined his patient. It was only when the overwhelming silence became too much did she pop back into the living room. Surprised, Shipman bluffed his way out of the situation by saying she just collapsed on me. She was, of course, at this point, already dead. The act of discovering his victims shortly after he had killed them was important to Shipman, and sometimes he would send their closest relatives a pre-printed, unsigned sympathy card. The local undertaker noticed that Dr. Shipman's patients seemed to be dying at an unusually high rate and exhibited similar poses in death. They were fully clothed and usually sitting up or reclining on a settee. He was concerned enough to approach Shipman about this directly, who reassured him there was nothing to be concerned about. Later, Dr. Susan Booth also found the similarity disturbing, and the local coroner's office were alerted, who in turn contacted the police. A covert investigation followed, but Shipman was cleared, as it seemed that his records were in order. A further 3 known victims, amongst them Kathleen Grundy, would die because Shipman was not arrested. Ultimately, it was left to Shipman himself to make the mistake that would bring his downfall. For some unbeknown reason, he decided to forge Mrs. Grundy's will to inherit her entire £3,800 estate. However, the pensioner's daughter, Angela Woodruff, a solicitor, immediately became suspicious. After briefly making her own inquiries, she called the police. When police finally began to investigate Shipman, they quickly identified a number of recurring themes. His victims tended to be those who lived alone. Some had visited his surgery shortly before they died. Often they had died in the afternoon, apparently his favourite time to kill. On the 7th of September, 1998, Shipman was arrested for the murder of Kathleen Grundy.
The time presently is 1:33 p.m. on Monday the 7th of September 1998. The first of the tape, could you tell me your full name, please?
Harold Frederick Shipman.
Who was interviewed for hours by Detective Mark Denham, was dismissive and arrogantly deflected the detective's questions, convinced he could get away with murder. He had killed his patients when they were alone, and as a doctor, he felt that people thought that there was nothing to it.
Perhaps I've made clear what happened when Mrs. Grundy asked me to witness the will.
We'll move on to Mrs. Grundy's will. That will, been forensically examined and found to be a forgery. Do you have any comment to make about that?
No, I've got no comment to make.
The letters in the will were all typed on your typewriter. Can you account for that?
No,
This is the typewriter that's kept in your surgery.
this is a typewriter that was loaned out to Mrs. Grundy on 2 or 3 occasions.
You allege that Mrs. Grundy borrowed the typewriter on 2 or 3 occasions. Talking here about a lady who was 81. I would imagine they have some difficulty in pumping a typewriter that high, but I'm asking who could have used your typewriter to type that letter.
No, I'm answering that I don't know.
Can I put it directly to you, Doctor, that you forged this will from your own typewriter in the hope of benefiting Mrs. Grundy's estate?
Is that a question or a statement?
Put it to you that that's the case.
That is not the case.
A broken key on a typewriter, seized from Shipman's surgery, alongside forensic analysis of his computer, showed that he had also tampered with medical records of patients, which pointed the finger in his direction. However, with no witnesses, no crime scene or murder weapon, the only hard evidence of Shipman's method was buried 6 feet under the ground. Greater Manchester Police took the unprecedented step of carrying out the exhumation of the bodies of Kathleen Grundy and 11 other victims. These were the first ever exhumations that Greater Manchester Police had carried out. Despite evidence coming to light, many of Shipman's patients were in utter disbelief of what he could have done to their loved ones.
My colleague and I went to one house and we were physically frog marched off the premises. You know, they weren't happy about us being there at all.
A few weeks after, forensic tests showed that the victims had been injected with a lethal dose of painkiller, diamorphine. It was the final piece of the puzzle, and all the detectives needed. Shipman was found guilty of 15 specimen murders by a jury at Preston Crown Court on the 31st of January 2000, after a trial that lasted 57 days, and he was finally sentenced to life in prison. The family GP, loved by many, is still the only keeper of the secret of just how many of his patients he injected with a fatal dose of diamorphine. Of the known 215 victims, 171 were women and 44 were men, with the oldest being a 93-year-old woman and the youngest a 47-year-old man. On the 13th of January 2004, he was found hanging in his cell at the HM Prison Wakefield in Yorkshire, a day before his 58th birthday, allegedly so that his wife could cash in on an £100,000 maximum pension payout. The staff tried to revive him, but he was pronounced dead at 8:10 GMT, taking his own life and all of his secrets.